1, 2, 2, 2. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. That's much better. Hello. 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. Hello. Check. 1, 2, 2.
So I think the plan would be you and Danny want to shoot a mic, and then Caroline, Judy or Chaz, whoever it's going to be. You can just pass it back and forth. Does that sound okay?
Perfect. Thank you. And do we have to have them, like, can they both?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Hi. Nice to see you again. I have here a trio of correspondents from this evening's ensemble. Caroline Vermeulen is our resident folklorist, and I'm very pleased to have her here today. She's a really incredible scholar, and she will be speaking with Alexa Hanks-Pilon, Charles Sherman, and Danny Mallon, all three from Musica Pacifica.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Okay, I guess we'll just jump right in. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I was just thinking maybe to just kind of get started and introduce what you're going to be playing tonight, if y'all could talk a little bit about the musical traditions that you're kind of representing and pulling from tonight.
Well, I can start it.
Okay.
Let's see. Some of the group have always been in love with Irish and Scottish folk music, and about 15 years ago, we decided to put together a program that would pull some, as best we could, take traditional tunes and work them into our framework of a historically informed Baroque group. So we arrange them. I mean, they're very much arrangements. A real Irish and Scottish, folk player is usually playing for a dance. People don't just sit down and listen to a concert. And so the pieces tend to run very long. You know, you wouldn't want to just sit here and hear the thing over and over again.
Like 20 times.
Yeah. And they're also very set forms. So we wanted to put a little more variety in to have something that would really work for listeners. And then as it happens, during the 18th century, there was a bit of a vogue of this kind of music in the concert hall. There were Scottish composers, there were Italian composers living in London who really liked Scottish music and arranged it for the music, for the forms of their time. And actually, that's I'd say, farther away from the traditional music than ours. But we're not playing strictly Irish, Scottish, English folk music. And then another thread of the concert that we're doing is this English country dance set. And one of our group, Judy Litzenberg, the recorder player, started playing for English country dance groups. And that's a totally different tradition. The tunes themselves go way back at, the Renaissance, the Middle Ages. And then there was a kind of a revival of the whole tradition of dance and tunes, and a lot of them were set in the late 19th century. And we have kind of stripped away that late 19th century feeling, and again, we've made them work for our group. And it's a very lively style of music, and it really does work for us. So we're pulling together the traditional, this 18th century reworking of this kind of music, which was, very much something that people liked then, and then our own take on it. And we're also just throwing in a few pieces by some of the composers in the United Kingdom that were working in the 17th and 18th century to kind of, leaven the program a little bit.
Did y'all want to add?
Do you want to talk about percussion a little with traditions?
Oh, sure. So I'll talk about some of the percussion instruments that I brought and maybe how they made their way into this music. None of the music has written percussion. Like most groups that I play with in the early music tradition. Unless I'm playing Baroque orchestral music, there's nothing written for percussion. So anything that you would play in this situation, you would write yourself, or just improvise. But a lot of these parts have been played before me, and I've adapted them in my own way. I'm actually subbing for the percussionist who usually plays this, but I've played this program quite a few times. And as much as I stick to kind of what I've heard him play, I also bring my own thing to it. So let's start with some of... Oh, that's okay. So some of the oldest instruments are rattles and shakers, and they developed around 33,000 BC. And we know this through archaeology and just kind of things they found at grave sites. Rattles and shakers, just often like a basket with some seeds inside or beans. They were probably used for to imitate nature sounds, and sometimes even maybe to scare away some evil spirits.
I gotta go.
See, it works every time. So that's that. And then much later, frame drums developed. Frame drums developed around 3500 BC. And they developed around the same time as the grain sieve. People stopped. There wasn't as much hunting and gathering, more agrarian, is that the right word? Agrarian. And frame drums were often, just a piece of wood and a skin on it. They were often painted blue for the sky, or red for blood, or green for vegetation. They were played mostly for ceremonial purposes, for like joining ceremonies, which we might now call marriage, or for harvest. They were almost exclusively played by women in ancient Mediterranean times. And every country has its own type of frame drum that they think originated in their country. But I think that they probably started in Northern Africa, in Egypt. So this particular frame drum, which is used during the English Mass, this is an Arabic frame drum. And you can see it's got 5 sets of paired brass jingles in the form of a 5-pointed star within a circle. So the circle represents infinity, as does that little squiggly line on there. Each one of those 5 sets of paired jingles represents one of the 5 phases of the moon. And the 5 phases are birth, growth, fruition, dissolution, death, birth, growth, fruition, dissolution. The cycle continues. And then you can see I have some stuff. There'll be some things I'll be playing with my feet, and almost every indigenous culture would have rattles or bells on their feet. Let's see, what else can I say? How did these things from way back then make their way into the music that we're playing tonight? Well, during the expansion of the Roman Empire, a lot of these instruments from the Middle East made their way around the world, not quite into like England or so, of the British Isles, but certainly nearby. And we know that during times of war or conflict or exodus, that cultural things make their way back and forth, including these instruments. And as far as how did we pick the sounds? Well, we have modern ears, and we try and pick the sounds that are right for what we hear today. And how do we know what instruments were being played where, when? Well, there's paintings, and there's stained glass windows, and that informs us on what was possible. And I think if there was a percussionist around when some of these tunes were being played, well, they would bring with whatever they had with them. And, so that's kind of how we chose the instruments, about like what we thought someone would play. And also there's been a lot of historical performance that has preceded this to inform us.
Awesome, great, thanks, that's really interesting. I guess, did you have anything to add? I was, so you were speaking about how, kind of, with the Roman Empire, how different instruments and stuff kind of moved. I was wondering, how do you see, or do you kind of see the impact of the influences of exile and immigration or displacement come up, like in this music or in the way that the music's changed? That's kind of a really broad question.
Yeah, that is a very broad question. So, especially with this program, like how I like to think of this program is kind of opposite of what you normally hear when you go to an early music concert. When you are generally going to like your typical concert, you kind of are put in a courtroom position. You're kind of like aristocrat and like Henry XIV, you know, like in Versailles. You're coming in from that kind of mentality. But with this is more like this is community kind of music. This is, you know, like Scotland, the clans, they would have like had shared land. They would have, you know, done a lot of community events together, which would have included a lot of this dance music. So like, think about it as kind of like the roots of your culture, of kind of your community, your clan, and you kind of take that with you. And when you're, you know, like in this kind of music, a lot of it was, especially with English, there was the Enclosure Acts, which meant that Parliament, so before these Enclosure Acts were passed, people had shared land. So you kind of lived off what you grew, what you farmed, that kind of thing. So then when Parliament in the 18th century, they created these Enclosure Acts, which then removed the poorest people, the peasants, and allowed the wealthy to kind of have this land. So this is the music that those people would have had when they were exiting their land and often immigrating to the US or other countries, other regions, because there was nowhere else for them to go. Because the government was like, oh, okay, well, you're poor, so you can have this really awful piece of land that has no water. Which led to like famine and other things. So with this kind of music, I really feel like it's kind of like, I always like to think of it as like, if you remember a song that your grandparents sang, and like, you know, when you're later in life and like they've passed, and you hear this song, you're like, oh, you know, it's that kind of thing where it kind of brings you back to your family roots, your culture, how you were raised, how you were, you know, in your little community, in your little clan.
Did anybody have anything they wanted to add to that? Any thoughts?
Well,
Charles,
sure.
you look like you have a
Yeah,
thought.
Well, we worked quite a bit with an American musician who lived in Nova Scotia, and in Nova Scotia there is a community of Scottish people who moved over, and they were directly impacted by the enclosure movement. They basically lost their land, and they went over to Canada, to Nova Scotia, and they brought their tradition of fiddling and dancing. That musician says, well, actually, the Cape Breton tradition is much closer to what the music was like in the 17th and 18th century when they came. The changes have been a lot bigger in Scotland itself. So, I mean, that would have been interesting to have on this program, but you know, he's not here, and you know, we decided not to do it. But even within Britain, you know, a lot of the music survived in the cities because you know, people had to leave the land, they couldn't make it, and they went into London, Liverpool, Birmingham, whatever, and you know, it's still alive today. From you know, people who came down from the Highlands, over from Ireland, it's you know, that's where it is. It's you know, there's a lot of it in you know, cities like that, and there's a direct thread to this time when they were forced off their land.
Well, even connecting it, because I'm originally from Canada, so Nova Scotia, yay. But even thinking about, like, in this country, like, the Appalachian folk music, all of that is connected with these three countries, the British Isles, but also with, like, with African, West African music as well. So just thinking about it from that, which then kind of leads us into country music, which is kind of a popular music thing that if there's any Swifties here. So it's that same kind of thing, like all of these kind of dances and folk tunes really kind of lead us and influence a lot of what we also kind of use today as we listen to, you know, the top whatever station that you're listening to. So it really is a progression of, you know, roots, but also expanding through it, and as, you know, as cultures are kind of moving around and we all are kind of experiencing new things together. It's kind of these, I always kind of like to think of it in food terms, it's kind of like a fusion restaurant. It's that kind of thing. So as we're seeing all of these cultures kind of build onto other things.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I know, so as a folklorist, there's a really big folklore school in Newfoundland, and a lot of the people there talk about like, oh, like it's more Irish than Ireland there, and kind of the same idea. And I've also working with Irish travelers, which this community that's kind of been pushed to the margins of society, you again see way more of kind of like what people looked at as like really traditional Irish music that has preserved is a weird word, but has kind of stayed the way it is because they've kind of been forced to keep themselves. That's really interesting. Awesome. I also just realized as I got up here, I have no way to keep track of time.
Oh, he just gave us a 5-minute.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Yeah, I was like, I normally have my watch on, and I was just like, oh, well, that's not there. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I was also really, like, when we talk about, or we're thinking about communities that are moving and being displaced or having to immigrate, I'm really interested in kind of the idea of home and how that changes, and how, I was wondering if y'all had anything to say about how you saw that being reflected or expressed in the music at all.
You think of an idea? No?
That's an idea.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So, my father's side of the family went from, in the late 1700s, from Ireland to Nova Scotia, to kind of up near Cape Breton. And I know there's a big, all the great fiddle music is there now, and everyone always talks about that, and it seems like there's more of a culture. And then eventually, I was born and raised in New York and made my way to New York, where there's also, in Sunnyside, Queens, there's a very big Irish community, and has been for many years. But as far as like, what I noticed is, it doesn't matter where you call home, because home is like the recipes you bring with you. It's the instruments and the songs and the tradition that you bring along. And what I love, I grew up in Queens, and Queens has about 186 dialects spoken, maybe even different languages. It's the most diverse place on the planet when it comes to language and heritage. And it's gotten more so since I was small. And what I noticed is that every stop on the 7 train is a community with the most amazing food and clothing and everything else. And I realized that they all brought this to this country, as well as music. America really doesn't have a music other than jazz is a true art form in America when it comes to folkloric music, and maybe tap dancing are 2 things that I think America created. Everything else kind of we took from somewhere else. And the music in America seems to be, there's Tejano, there's bluegrass, there's yodeling, there's jazz, there's this, there's that. There's so many styles of music in the United States. And the reason we have this rich culture is because of everyone that came to this country and called it their home. But it's not home because they live here, it's home because of what they brought with them. And that's my take on it.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said.
Can't top that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that gets it. That's great. Okay, how are we on?
I think
Like a minute and a half.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's kind of what I had for y'all. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol.
Oh yeah, we've got a couple of time for some questions.
Oh, questions.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
You mentioned Swift. Why?
Well, because I was talking about like country music and kind of popular music, and you know, Taylor Swift is kind of a
Forced to be reckoned.
yes, a force to be reckoned with. So my point was that like with country music, a lot of the influences come from England, Scotland, Ireland, along with West Africa. But it's just kind of this same thing, and the same idea of like these dances and folk tunes are from a poorer level, and like with country music, up until probably like 10 years ago, a lot of it was about like the hard, like the working class, that, you know, you had to really work hard, and if your truck broke down, like it was really a big deal, you know, that kind of, so it's a similar kind of musical, so that was how I was connecting it. Thank you for, I hope that made a little more sense.
I don't know much about her music, but has she derived something?
I was just referring to country music and, you know,
In general,
yeah.
Americanized music.
Yeah, popular music, yeah.
She was country once.
Yeah,
upon a time.
she started off as a country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, great.
Thank you so